So anyway, over the Occupy movement is out there. They've shut down 2 Portland terminals. They've interfered with a third. There are more and more of these confrontations taking place with the police all across America here. And I'm one of those people who was wondering if the Occupy movement was going to wind up kind of fizzling out as the weather got a little bit colder. And I'm rather happy to see that was most assuredly not the case. And they're still out there, and they're still fighting the good fight, as it were. Now, I want to talk a little bit about Newt Gingrich here because, well, I can't believe that this guy's even in the running. I mean, he got kicked out of the speakership. He's got a long history of corruption. Is this the best the GOP can come up with? Well, I guess compared to people like Michelle Bachmann and the rest, yeah, maybe it is. I mean, they're just desperate to keep Ron Paul out of the running, and they've pinned all their hopes on Newt Gingrich. And every time he opens his mouth, he just reminds us of why we should not even consider him as a candidate. There was a story we put out there, among Gingrich's passions, a doomsday vision. Newt Gingrich, the Republican presidential hopeful, wants you to know that as a commander-in-chief, he's ready to confront one of the most nightmarish of doomsday scenarios, a nuclear blast high above the United States that would instantly throw the nation into a dark age. What does he mean he's ready to confront it? There's nothing he can do about it if it happens. He dreams of a crisis that he can stand in the middle of and look good. Like a firebug who burns down the town so afterwards he can be seen helping the wounded. I mean, fantasizing about disasters that one can look good in, look like a hero in, that's something people grow out of at age 9 or 10. But Newt is basically saying he lives for the day that millions of lives are devastated and they must look to him for salvation. He's a nut. He's crazy. He's a maniac. Now, the Arab League has condemned Gingrich's remarks on Palestinians being an imaginary people or an invented people. And a lot of people are upset with Newt Gingrich. He basically said it because Israel said, yeah, this is what you say. We will let you be president if you will say this. And if Newt is this big of a jerk before he even wins a single primary, imagine what he's going to be like if he actually gets the White House. All your children are going to die in wars on Israel's enemies. That's what he's promising in exchange for being president. Now, I want to look a little bit more closely at what Newt Gingrich has been saying about this whole Palestinian issue. Newt's logic is that Palestine didn't exist before the 20th century because those lands were all part of the Ottoman Empire, and that erases any prior maps we may have of Palestine or any mentions by Herodotus that go back to the 6th century. But isn't that also true of Israel? It's the same land. If being part of the Ottoman Empire erases Palestine's prior claim to the land, then it does to Israel as well. It's the same land. That's one logical flaw with what Newt is saying. But here's another one. Newt is saying the Palestinians are an invented people because there is no such thing as a Palestinian race. There's no Palestinian language. Well, doesn't that also apply to Americans? I mean, the rightful people of the of this continent, are the Indians. Is there a specific American language? No, we speak English and Spanish and a few other things like that. Is there an American race? No, we're all transplanted Europeans and Asians and Africans and Mexicans and all the rest. There's no American race. There's no American language that's unique to itself. And you will not find a place called America on any maps before the year 1492. Under the same logic that Newt Gingrich says the Palestinians are an imaginary people, so are Americans. And I don't think we ought to have a president who thinks we're all imaginary people out here. Actually, Newt, you can imagine you're the president and go away and leave the rest of us to live in the real world. Guy's a bozo here. Every time you hear this guy talk, it's all about violence and bombs and, things like that. Newt Gingrich on Iran, bunker-busting bombs, blow up the refineries, political assassinations and stuff like that. Newt Gingrich on North Korea. We need a ray gun at North Korea missiles. End the regime. Newt Gingrich on Syria. End that regime. Newt Gingrich on Gaza, total war we must have. Newt Gingrich on Hezbollah, declare World War III and join Israel in destroying this force. Hamas, Nazi group, unconditional surrender, mass slaughter. I already talked about the Palestinians. Newt is out there screaming about a new axis of evil of Islamic radicals, atheists, and gays bent on establishing fascist rule, which he cannot allow because his goal, of course, is Wall Street fascist rule. Newt's comment on the Occupy Wall Street people, they need to take a bath and get a job. Newt, you and the government took the jobs away, remember? Tax credits to corporations to offshore the high-paying jobs. When that mosque was going to be erected near Ground Zero, Newt called it Nazism. Actually, the Muslims and the Nazis never really got along all that well. And in any event, there's this little thing called the First Amendment. The federal government is not allowed to pass any laws for or against specific religions. Congress shall make no law respecting an institution of religion. There's no state church. There's no banned church. Newt is an un-American. He's not an American. He doesn't subscribe to America's founding principles. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Okay, welcome back to the show. I think we got our levels a little bit more back in line to where they ought to be. And there does seem to be a little bit of noise on the line as well. Oh, well, that's when you're living in a fascist third world dictatorship, you just can't expect equipment to run. If you want decent communications and technology, the terrorists are going to win. Anyway, I'm going to wrap up with Newt Gingrich. I'm tired of talking about the guy here, but I do want to end with my favorite Newt Gingrich quote of all time. She's not pretty enough to be the president's wife, and besides, she's got cancer. Alrighty, moving right along here. Now, obviously, a big story is the news. We're getting this from the Corbett report and from Sybil Edmonds, that NATO and U.S. troops are starting to deploy along the Jordan-Syrian border. And Turkey is now talking about a humanitarian mission into Syria. Humanitarian, of course, being bullets and white phosphorus. France is trying to create a justification for this war by saying that Syria was behind the attacks on UN troops in Lebanon last week. Syria and Hezbollah have both, denied this story and said they had nothing to do with it. Why would they be going on and attacking troops in Lebanon? Now, what's really kind of interesting is we're seeing this huge propaganda run-up to try and justify an attack on Syria here. And interestingly enough, there was a Barbara Walters interview with Assad that was re-edited to make him look as bad as possible. And the Syrian Arab News Agency caught ABC doing this. Remember, ABC's the Food Lion Network. They have a long history of faking the news to serve corporate or political need. So this Syrian Arab News Agency put up on their Facebook page the before and after videos of the ABC interview to show how ABC had changed it around to make Assad and Syria look bad. And Facebook responded by taking the page down. Not quite the image of Facebook we got in that little movie about the social networks, right? So, now the important thing to remember here is that back in 2006, Iran and Syria signed a mutual defense agreement to mutually support each other, cooperating against the common threats presented by Israel and the United States of America. So, remember what Franklin Roosevelt did when Japan and Germany and Italy signed the Axis Agreement? Franklin Roosevelt wanted to get the United States into the war against Nazi Germany. Nobody in the United States wanted to go to war against Nazi Germany. They still remembered World War I. All those badly crippled and injured people, the veterans, the survivors from World War I, were still walking around. And they were saying, no, you don't want to do this. We did it, 20 years ago, and it wasn't really a very good idea. So as soon as Japan and Germany and Italy signed the Axis Agreement, Franklin Roosevelt said, how can I get us into war with Japan? Because if I can get us into war with Japan, then inevitably we'll be in war against Germany, which is what I really want. And that, of course, was the genesis of this whole Arthur H. McCollum plan to provoke Japan into an attack that Franklin Roosevelt could use to start a war. And that's what we're seeing here right now. Obama is trying to get us into a war with Syria because that will be the back door of accomplishing the real agenda with war with Iran. Remember what I've been telling you the last couple of weeks. Israel is desperate to get the war with Iran going before the end of this year, within the next 2 weeks, because after January 1, all those American bullet catchers stuck in Iraq get to go home. And so Israel needs to get the war with Iran going now, so that the Americans in Iraq are there to stop the Iranian counterattack. And the United States will have an excuse to go to the government of Iraq and say, look, we can't leave now. Those Iranians are coming this way, and they still remember how you were trying to, bomb them and everything during the Iran-Iraq war. And yeah, we, the United States, put you up to it, but those Iranians aren't going to remember that. They're just going to come in and kill all of you. Okay, and so that's what we need to keep in mind. There is a mutual defense pact between Iran and Syria. And all of this attempt to get into Syria, it's just another way of sidestepping us into the real war that everybody wants your kids to die in, which is Iran. And that's what's going on. By the way, can you believe the brass of Obama asking Iran for the drone back? Gee, we're sorry we violated your airspace and we're spying on you and we're getting ready to bomb you and kill all your wives and kids and anything like that. But that is an expensive piece of hardware that you picked up in the desert. And we'd really like it back. It's like these bozos at the FBI. Every time somebody finds one of those GPS trackers on their car, the FBI will say, they cost a lot of money. Can we have one back? I said, sure. I'm just going to throw it off the top of this 20-story building and run over it with a steamroller 4 or 5 times, and then you can have it back. Sure, why not? It's like they committed an act of war against Iran. I don't think they're going to get the drone back. By now, everybody in Russia and China is getting pieces of this thing to analyze and take apart. Barclays Capital is out there basically saying the probability of an Israeli or U.S. strike on Iran has already tripled. Everybody knows that's what Israel wants, and if Israel wants it, that's what the U.S. government wants. Because if the U.S. government doesn't go along with the war in Iran, well, Israel will let somebody else be president and members of Congress next year. And all the incumbents will have to go out and get real jobs. And you know what that's like in this economy. Over in Israel, a senior Israeli official is saying many Arab countries are not ready for democracy. And that's a good reason to basically counter revolt or put down these Arab revolutions, where people are saying we want to have a democratic government. And Israel's saying, they're not ready for it, really. They're not ready for democracy at all. Well, do you mean democracy like Israel is practicing on the Palestinians? I don't know. Kind of a gray area in there. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back.